Huge volcanic eruption, ash rolls over, and then suddenly there's snow on the West Coast in the middle of summer. It's actually in the realm of possibility. But that got very, very few headlines. Very few. And you would think with that large of an eruption, they had NASA images and European Space Agency images and private satellite images. Wow, it was a huge, huge eruption.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine.
Second thing about the wildfires. We're talking about all the heat in the Arctic, wildfires, etc. They're focusing on this, although it happens every year. And again, for me, it's a non-news story. I mean, I don't understand it. It burns every year. What's new? So I went to the Danish Meteorological Institute to take a look at the Arctic temperatures from 80 degrees north latitude up to the North Pole. Now, you've been told, and I've been told, and if you looked at the news media this year, they keep talking about the hottest Arctic ever, and this runaway heat up there. And this is a pervasive headline for the last 3 months? And now they're chucking in the wildfires to try to add up a whole sensationalism thing to get another click because, dinosaur media is dying and they're doing everything they can to try to bring revenue in through advertising. Legacy media, bye-bye. So I found the temperatures up at the Arctic Circle, and they haven't actually exceeded the 45-year average this year yet. And you got to understand that 45-year average was from 1958 to 2002. Now, the world I've been brought up in, and I know I understand the world, at least the way they're presenting it to me, which I don't agree with a lot of it, so I sentiently choose not to agree with it and go off in my own direction as my own free-willed choice. Those temperatures from 1958 to 2002, that was the range where CO2 didn't have that much effect from the 1950s all the way to the early 1990s. So in earnest, out of that 44-year record, we should have only gotten 10 years of heat spike from the increased warming, right? So at that time, that 45-year trend of average temperature should have been lower than what we would expect today because those temperatures were taken much further back in time when there was not as much CO2, there was not as much car, factory, economy on the planet back in the 50s. Compare today's world with 1950. Geez, it's not even close. Even 1960, 1970. Compare 1970 to today's world. Not even close. In terms of population and fossil fuel burning, not even close. So we got the full 44-year record here of temperatures prior that should have been cooler. And they're screaming about incredibly heated Arctic. And then I look at the temperature charts and I'm falling on the floor going, wait a second, it was below normal for most of this season so far, for the summer season in the Arctic. So I wrote that and I did a video about it. And you know what the comment was coming back? A couple people wrote to me and said this. Why are you only focusing on 80 degrees north to the North Pole? You didn't include 70 degrees all the way to the North Pole. You're giving a false picture of the Arctic being cooler because you're only focusing on 80 degrees to 90 degrees in the North Pole. And I thought to myself, oh my. Now that even if you talk about the North Pole and point out that it's not above normal temperatures, you didn't encompass enough of the North Pole. Now, where are we going with the delusion in this? The comments are a video in themselves talking about the delusion. Arctic's heating. No, it's not. Oh, you didn't include enough of the Arctic. You only included the top part of the Arctic. You didn't include the area where it's burning. You got to include that. No, 80 degrees north to 90 degrees is what the North Pole is. I don't know how much more cleanly you can define the North Pole. The whole top of the planet from 80 degrees north up to the very tippy top where it says 90 at the North Pole, where the 90, where those crosshairs go, where any direction you move is going to take you back south again. That place, North Pole, not warming this year. Again, what should I just go down to like 60 degrees north up to the North Pole and make the video about that? That's in a whole new cloud band, man. 60 to 90 north is a whole new cloud cell on the planet. 0 north to 30 north is one Hadley cell. That's what everybody knows that one. That's like the most familiar one. But then you truck further north, you get 30 to 60, and then you get 60 to 90 up to the top up there with a high blocking pattern this year. And you know, the high blocking pattern was supposed to set record heat in the Arctic, but it didn't. So calling out, I couldn't believe the responses on that. It's really delusion. I can't describe it any other way than mental illness, where you won't accept the science because it doesn't prove the point. So you have to say that the science is no longer valid, that what they used to prove global warming for all these years now shows something different. So now you have to suddenly discount it. That's insanity, truly. So what's the all-out effort here to get us on the same train of thought in the global media? And I had a really interesting discussion when I was traveling with somebody who followed my work for years and years and years. And, you know, I invited me over for a barbecue with he and his wife and went over there and had a chance to sit down. And he was saying, all right, you know, Douglas Vogt's work, he's saying a massive mini-nova from the sun is due in like 2042 or so. So he's like, maybe your whole study of the grand solar minimum is just the lead-in to the massive change on the sun that will then send out a nova. Perhaps we go through this pole reversal / mini ice age / grand solar minimum, and that's just the precursor when you get both happening at the same time, to then the onset of the full-on big show. That we're in the pregame show here with the magnetic pole reversal, which is the first inning, and you know, we get this grand solar minimum that's going to lead it in, because the coupling of both of these happening, everything's amplifying, racing much faster than anticipated. What if that's the first precursor that would alert everybody to the pole reversal?
And speaking of cycles, my new book with my co-author Bill Porter, Climate Revolution, a must-read for understanding our sun-driven climate. As we progress deeper into this new Eddy grand solar minimum, weather extremes leading to global food scarcity and higher food prices are here now. This book describes the expected changes, how to survive and thrive during future challenging times, and also practical preparations. The entire book is interactive with over 250 links, so you can click and go out to the scientific aspect of what we're talking about with the repeating cycles in this grand solar minimum. The science is explained so you understand the mechanisms. The solutions are there because we know we're going to face these exact same problems again that were faced in the Maunder minimum, the Sporer minimum, the Wolf minimum. Find designs for building greenhouses, grow guides, beam soil techniques, as well as bioreactors to create your own growth hormones for the soil. Available now, the new Adapt 2030 Climate Revolution. The link's in the description box below.
And he also brought up another important point here that also has been brought up in Adam and Eve's story. I don't know if you follow the Adam and Eve saga here released by the CIA about the pole reversals magnetically and what happens to our weather system on the planet on a magnetic pole reversal, not a actual physical pole shift like Hapgood talked about with the Earth's crustal displacement. That's something very different. We're talking about a magnetic pole reversal. So in the Adam and Eve story, it was very cleanly spoken of, and I can't even believe they let this in. This is the key point here. The science we understand about the last magnetic pole reversal on Earth being at 780,000 years, is that correct or incorrect? Because in Adam and Eve's story, it very cleanly states that when the magnetic poles reverse, they switch back to the exact same spot they started. So if you would be an observer out there and you had dug cores, every time the poles would reverse back to the exact same spot, you would never have known they reversed. You would think that magnetic pole had stayed there indefinitely, that it never moved. But what happened if it did move and then it reversed back to the same place? And it did move and it reversed back to the same place. And everything we thought about where the magnetic poles have been stable for so long, It's just the reset point, and every time they got a measurement, it was at the reset point that it hadn't moved into the new reversal yet. Now, Volt is very clean saying that it's on a 12,000-year cycle. We got the Younger Dryas era, which matches up with this stone head that they found out in the fields of an old Civil War battlefield in North Carolina. Same mini nova time frame. And Douglas Volt saying we're coming to another one here, same time frame, 12,000 years. So if you were a government of a world, you would definitely be putting everything underground you possibly could. This could explain the deep underground military bases. You know, there's a lot of conjecture as to why all this stuff's being built. Now, a grand solar minimum in itself would be tumultuous for society. Like, we would reset everything, including monetary system. Everything's reset. Population's going to be greatly reduced. And actual cycles that are mappable through our solar system, through the spiral arm of our galaxy, and even into the center of our galaxy, the interwoven nature of electromagnetism, and how these cycles are repeatable, how they're on a mathematically precise electrical wave frequency, and they can be mapped out. Now, there's some lighter cycles with less intensity, and there are heavier cycles that we know through history as civilization resets. Now, where are we in terms of the flow right now in the cycle? Well, we've definitely begun a step down into the grand solar minimum and the magnetic pole reversal. And speaking of which, this is off Electroverse. Those thinking wavy jet streams and polar vortices are something new caused by increasing CO2. Please reference the Great Arctic Outbreak of February 1899. The polar vortex and low solar activity to blame. In the newspapers, in print, they even talked about low solar activity being to blame. Now also, and that reminded me of a thought at the same time, was the Great Freeze of 1607 in the Netherlands and Germany as well. Very similar to today's conditions, early spring, flowers were blooming in February, some anomalous cold, which is interesting because the record cold in February this year in the Netherlands and Germany, and then it's followed by the record heat in the Netherlands and Germany. Both things happened in the Great Freeze of 1607. And then what happened successively after that was they had a dropout in temperatures where they lost crops for 2 straight years. So are we repeating a cycle back into the early 1600s with the Great Freeze also in what was then Bavaria and bringing it up to the coast in the Netherlands, the Dutch areas? So it's very interesting how cycles do repeat and if they can be forecast, because this is all what it's all about. Keeping your family safe as the new changes emerge. And if we can see the new changes based on historical fact or history itself, with the electromagnetism mapping the sun, mapping the cycles of our planets, and mapping our relationship of our solar system to other solar systems and stars themselves and the spiral arm of our Milky Way. And that in turn could be mapped further out into what is the center of our galaxy. Now, what's coming off of the center of our galaxy as well? I mean, how far out are those field lines extending? Because, you know, we're living in a universe of electromagnetism. And what we see either off our Earth with the field aligned currents coming out, you know, when we get aurora, that's the charged particles coming in on those magnetic field lines. They're invisible to us with our eyes, but they're there. That's what the charged particles, they race down those lines and then hit our North Pole or South Poles and give us the aurora when we get, you know, solar storms from the sun. Now, the sun itself also has a vast magnetic field, and those magnetic field lines on the north and south pole of the sun are also acting in the very exact same way, but they're drawing their charge on a Birkeland current from elsewhere. Now, think about also our galaxy has the same effect. So currents coming into the center of the galaxy extending out in a torus wave are looping through the spiral arms of our galaxy. And our sun in its torus wave is looping through our solar system and our planets. And our Earth itself is looping out to the moon. And further off, you'd be surprised, we almost touch over there at Venus. That's how far out our poles are looping on the torus wave. So the magnetics of the Earth, the magnetics of the sun, our solar system, and further out into the other stars, and then our galaxy itself. Ancients had mapped all of this. So if I'm talking to you and you say, what is this guy talking about? You have to realize that ancient societies mapped these cycles already. They're going back in cyclical patterns of 220 million years as one cycle. going around. And when I talk about the spiral arm of the galaxy, I mean one full circulation of the spiral arm of the galaxy around one time back to the start point again. How did they have such vast knowledge to map this out? When we are at the borderline, we, even with our modern supercomputers, are just at the edge of understanding all of the cycles of even our spiral arm of our galaxy going around one time. But the ancients had already put this into full context and mapped it out. So what knowledge did they have that we currently don't have? Or it's been hidden from us. That's the only plausible explanation. Are we really stupid apes like this that can't understand our own galaxy the way it interacts with other stars and solar systems? Or are we just hiding the information from others? Got to be one of the two. It's like an A or B choice. It's pretty simple. We're stupid apes and we can't figure out our own galaxy, or the information's hidden. Now imagine if you did have the information and you were the hider of the information. How much of it, like a huge advantage that would give you to control society if you hid that information from the masses? It's almost like priests of old on top of the temples emerging out of the deserts or out of the rainforest, and they were the ones that could see and forecast eclipses and tell the people, we're gods. We can make the sun disappear. But they knew an eclipse was coming. I mean, sheesh, I could do that too. All right, well, on May 12th, there's going to be an eclipse from 12:45 to 12:49. And if we set up the ceremony in the morning and we get everybody out there, I could proclaim this like 3 minutes before the sun disappears. And then the animals will get real startled. There'll be crazy sounds in the forest. And then I could say, yeah, make the sun come back, worship me. And then 4 minutes later, the sun reemerges. And they're like, oh, how did he know that? Well, if I had better knowledge of cycles of the moon are revolving, imagine if I had that cycle pattern down and the rest of the society didn't. That little bit alone could make you a ruler of the world at the time. So think about that. Now, bring it into the modern era here. If you were hiding that information, what would you hide from the public so you could still retain power and leadership when most of it is ill-gotten gains and leadership and power? How about going back to the Key of Solomon? How many of these dark energies are being used and mapped out? I mean, they'd mapped out the different entities and dimensional realms already for sheesh. How many thousands of years? People worshiping specific entities at a certain frequency range. Now, if you knew about this, I'm not really into the dark arts, so I never touch these things, but I've read about them. Go back to the Key of Solomon, check out the Goetia, and see how many of these entities are out there, and they have certain different frequency, and again, they purvey certain types of information to individuals that seek those things out and worship them and give them energy and all these things. Now, being in contact with that being in itself would give you huge understandings of where the circular patterns of just cycles of the workings would be. Perhaps that's what they were touching into and communicating directly with this being that was giving them so much information about our 220 million year cycle. Perhaps they're using psychedelics and touching with these beings, using DMT and going off and getting into the realms. There's a lot of information being purveyed out there. So maybe there's a whole collective of people who are just into psychedelics, and they're kind of the messengers going between worlds and bringing back information to the elite. They always make psychedelics illegal, although they do nothing for addictiveness. Nobody gets addicted to magic mushrooms. That you use these things with reverence and you jump into different worlds. How many peyote addicts do you know? Ayahuasca addicts that are sitting on the side of the street homeless because they're using ayahuasca daily. None. Zero. Look at all the problems with the opiates. Look at all the problems with the meth. That's the stuff they want you to use, because that is the dark realm, hell energies encapsulated in a physical form that overtake the body. Yet these things that give you greater knowledge and vast access to universal workings are forbidden from us, the average citizens across the planet. Why do they not want you to access these different realms? There's hidden information all around us. Cycles of time, cycles of civilization.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at trueleafmarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. trueleafmarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
The sun is an energetic being. Imagine being able to talk to the sun, communicate with the sun telepathically. The workings of these higher dimensional realms, especially in star systems and stars themselves that are energetic beings, you don't communicate by talking, it's telepathy. So imagine having a conversation with the sun telepathically. Would you be even able to get to that level, or would it be too strong for your physical body energy level and it'll blow you out like a circuit? Bzz. The Great Freeze of 1607 and the Great Freeze, the cycle of 1899. Now, if we are stepping down into something cooler here, and I want to run through a couple of the cold temperature stories. Now, we've heard about a lot about the hot stories, right? Like when I look over here at a rundown on, let me see, I'm going to come back to the Big Wobble. I actually like this site a lot, although they're pretty pro-global warming. I like the way they did, I said in the last hour, the way they coupled the extreme heat in Europe, and then they also, in the very same article, sandwiched together the cancellation of Tour de France, stage 19, due to snow. July snows canceled that leg of the Tour de France. But it was such extreme weather, such extremes. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 24 hours, and then there was extreme lightning. To put this into context, you're up there, the Tour de France is cruising, the heat wave's down further. Obviously when you're in the mountains it's going to be cooler, but it's still warmer in the mountains. But then there was an inverse, and where the equatorial vortex was punching through the atmosphere, once it moved slightly, that preceding edge of the front dropped in. When the equatorial vortex moved and that heat was displaced, well, it was displaced by the cold that dropped in. And they had, apparently, now some stations were saying 20-degree drop in temperatures in 24 hours. Other stations said 40-degree drop in 24 hours. It was more like an extreme lightning front mixed with snow that swept through. But the plants growing and maturing in the fields are not going to like that. Not only did the plants just get pelted, our crops, with record heat, but a few weeks ago it was record cold. They had the coldest temperatures ever recorded in July, going back 300 years in both Germany and the Netherlands. And then when we come up into Norway and Finland, they experienced the same thing, but they had snow. So you get this record heat, record cold, record heat, record cold, flip-flop 4 times in a month. Now, how do you think the crops are going to respond to that in the ground? That's what it's all about. It's all about the food. No food, no civilization. And I'm not even going to say society and sugarcoat it. I'm going to say no food, no civilization, period. We've seen the collapse through history again and again and again. We get to these high points of civilization, not even society, because societies are smaller pockets within the entire civilization. The human civilization is greatly reduced and collapses into a dark age. Talking about the wildfires and what they're focusing on here now, they're focusing on the wildfire smoke traveling east from Siberia, reaching Alaska. When the sea levels were lower, from Siberia over to Alaska, people walked across that. It's a land bridge back when sea levels were lower. So for them to come out with massive, huge headlines going, oh, the smoke moved over from Siberia to Alaska, it's terrible, oh my God. Put it into context. Humans walked across that. It's not that vast of a distance. It's just a clickbait headline. And again, these wildfires happen every single year in Siberia. It's not a new phenomenon. It's a yearly phenomenon. You know what would spook me more? If there were no wildfires. Now that would be scary. With no wildfires, something has definitely jumped the shark and changed there. But now what they're saying is the wildfire smoke is going to, in the future, don't know when, sometime next week, next week, next week, they don't know. They say in the future, that smoke is going to get in the atmosphere over Greenland, and it's going to cause Greenland to run away with its melting, and it's going to raise sea levels just from a little bit of smoke that is going to dissipate over Canada. And by the time it reaches over to Greenland, it's going to be really a nothing burger. It'll be so dissipated by that time, but they're going to run with the headline like, look, the smoke is causing melting on Greenland. Now, that is truly a cooling agent. When we get sulfur dioxide and volcanic ash particulate in the air on an eruption that blew up 68,000, almost 70,000 feet in the atmosphere and was carried completely over to the West Coast, perhaps that's what caused the snow in British Columbia and Alberta. It's possible. And you put the causation to effect here, huge volcanic eruption, ash rolls over, and then suddenly there's snow on the West Coast in the middle of summer. It's actually in the realm of possibility. But that got very, very few headlines. Very few. And you would think with that large of an eruption, they had NASA images and European Space Agency images and private satellite images. Wow, it was a huge, huge eruption. I mean, I did a whole video on it. The amount of dust coming out of that thing was stupendous. And what was most interesting is they have the Himawari 8 satellite run by Japan. It sees the sunrise coming up from the east from, let's say, Japan area, and a little bit north up into that same Kamchatka End Peninsula there. That satellite is stationary, and it takes an image of the sunrise looking toward North America, looking toward Canada and the west coast United States and Alaska. The day after that eruption, when that sunrise came up, the entire horizon was brown with volcanic dust. And it still didn't cool or do anything with Greenland. You never heard anything about that volcanic dust because it would have cooled Greenland. Now, this is smoke, not volcanic aerosols. It is such a night and day difference on the effect of what smoke can do versus sulfur dioxide and volcanic ash. Yet for some reason, because it's a Siberian fire, they're trying to give it all this impetus, like this smoke can do all this. Halfway across the planet, it's going to raise the temperatures and melt the ice sheet on Greenland. All the insanity. I look at these things, I'm like, wow. Here's another one coming up. Something big is going on up there, and they're talking about further higher in the atmosphere. Sunsets are being witnessed around the world as the Arctic burns. Worst Arctic wildfires in 10,000 years. Come on. I can't even believe that headline. Now, here's the thing. Back in the 1930s, and if you look at the wildfire index just in the United States, just in the western part of the United States, they have the wildfire index out there. Now, there's two wildfire indices. One is for the western part of the United States from the 1850s, and then they have a global wildfire index from the 1650s. Now, the only reason I know this is because I already did videos on this before. Remember Governor Jerry Brown, Moonbeam down there in California, kept saying it's the worst, it's the hottest in 10,000 years or whatever because of the wildfires. Even in the 1850 wildfire index up to today, there were far more wildfires in the 1930s than there are today. And once I pointed that out, people came out of the woodwork again. Oh, there's better fire control today. Oh, they didn't put out forest fires like they did then. Oh, there was more trees, so there had to be more burn back then. Always an excuse to explain away the fact. But what is it with the push? Now, have you noticed one thing in the news articles I've been reading to you over the day here? Why is it suddenly everything is gigantically ramped up in the number of years? 12,000 years? 10,000 years? 10,000 years? 7,800 years? Now, have you noticed the number of years in these news articles keeps getting wider? Before, they had focused you in on the last 150 years, or the last 100 years, or the last 50 years. That's been a big one in the IPCC and the global warming CO2 push, if you will, is to wrangle you in mentally into the last 150 years in earnest when things did start to warm after the little ice age ended. It's been nonstop warming since then. Now it's plateaued, and we're starting to cool again into a new cycle. Fine, it's a cycle. I don't discount that it has warmed since the end of the mini ice age, but glaciers are starting to reform across the planet this year and last, the beginnings, the rumblings of it last year. Glacier National Park has removed the signs that said, look, all these glaciers are going to disappear because they've increased this last year. And you can't have a sign right in front of the visitor center that says the glaciers are going to disappear when they gained 13 feet last year and marched closer to the visitor center.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.